Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Hello if you're new here, my name is Alicia and today I'm going to be kind of telling a creepy story. The reason I wanted to do this was because my true crime video that I did with my best friends went really well, but number two, I really wanted to do this because it's, October. The whole month is Halloween for me basically, and I wanted to do something to, commemorate that. I haven't really done any Halloween makeup videos or anything like that, so I wanted to do something else and I wanted to tell this story. It's also kind of another hometown type of story. It is located close to home here in Georgia, and I'm actually going to be covering the Central State Hospital. You may not know it by that name. It might be more familiar to you if I say the Milledgeville Insane Asylum, or as it was originally coined in 1842, the Georgia Idiot, Lunatic, and Epileptic Asylum. If that name doesn't tell you about what I'm about to cover, then I don't know what else will. If you would like to hear about the eerie history of this place, then please continue watching. Thanks. Alright, so like I said, it originally opened in 1842 under the name Georgia Lunatic, Idiot, and Epileptic Asylum. Under basically good pretenses, the people who opened it really did want to try and help people who were mentally ill, but it definitely grew out of their control extremely fast. Like most mental institutions today and previously, it was underfunded, there was way too many patients, too few caretakers, and of course that's all going to lead to, neglect and abuse of some sort later down the line. It started as a single building, basically just think of a pretty large home. A single building on 2,000 acres. That's what was granted to them. I think it was a little bit smaller when they first bought the land, but ended up expanding to 2,000 acres. And that's where they would house all of their patients. Their first patient, his name was Tillman B., was admitted in December of 1842, but he had unfortunately died 6 months after he was admitted. So he died basically before the summer of the next year, and his cause of death on his death certificate was mechanical exhaustion. So not a very good beginning for them, I don't say. And actually, I did read somewhere, I didn't put this in my notes, but I did read somewhere that 29 out of their first 50 patients ended up living their entire lives and ended up dying there. And technically only 8 of those patients, of their first patients, were considered cured. I also don't know what their definition of cured was, because if you know anything about mental health, there really is no cure. But at the time, this wasn't a place just for mental illness. I came across that patients were admitted for intemperance. So basically anything that wasn't, or that was considered not a societal norm. Then we have religious excitement. Whether that be you decided you wanted to talk in tongues that day, maybe you wanted to start practicing polygamy, I don't really know. But if you were out of line with the church in some sort of way, then off you go. We also have domestic unhappiness. So, John, if you have a couple extra dollars and Cindy's not listening, off she goes. She'll be fixed in no time. We also have ill health and jealousy. That one I genuinely want to know who was sent there for ill health and jealousy, because how jealous do you have to be sent off? Are we stalking people or trying to kill somebody because we want what they have, a Lifetime movie, or are we just kind of saw that they got the shoes that you wanted? What level are we at here? So as you can see, they're basically being admitted for any sort of reason, as long as they can just get sent off somewhere to house people. It wasn't all bad. So far we have their first patient died 6 months after care. We have everybody and their brother and sister basically being admitted. But first Dr. Thomas Green, who was originally running the place, he, like I said, did have good intentions. He was practicing under a more, a more advanced, mindset for his time. He was basically practicing a family like institution. So he would not only like eat and drink with his staff and patients, but the patients would also like work the fields there. They would, do wood workshops. They would basically keep the facility up and running. So they basically worked there. They weren't their own nurses yet, but they did work on premises. They worked alongside one another and things like that. So you could basically think of it as a Finland really nice prison where they get to, live a pretty okay life. But that is in the beginning. And as you can guess, it goes downhill from here. Dr. Thomas Green also had abolished rope and chain restraints for their, patients there, which was really good and exciting for them. They, had a little bit more freedom. So the asylum actually began to fill more after the Civil War because Sherman, on his march to the sea, left the asylum standing. He didn't burn it down or destroy it, even though it was kind of already, becoming decrepit in the first place. But he left it standing, so it was still there for whenever the war was finally finished. And there were a lot of veterans who ended up going there, whether that had been because they might have been homeless, they had nothing to come back to, or whether it be because they truly needed help. As you know, there's PTSD and things like that. Jesus. And a lot of these veterans ended up staying there, and just because they couldn't really return to their normal lives. Now, another problem that they faced, which I personally didn't think about, was the fact that after the Civil War, slaves were freed. That meant they had to receive care, basically. That hadn't been happening before, obviously, because I'm pretty sure white people did not care about their slaves. So they started coming to the asylum, and they didn't have any segregated, housing yet. They only really still had that one building, but by law, they had to be segregated. Whites and blacks could not stay in the same facilities as one another. So until they got their other buildings built, they were sleeping outside on the ground. And that's where they were doing their business and things like that. So that's a very defeating and demeaning type of living situation. It wasn't until 1879 when the staff to patient ratio was 1 to 112 that Dr. Powell implemented different ward placements. You have a lot of patients for a little staff is what we're seeing. But what does it mean to have different ward placements? Is at this point in time, everybody was being housed under the same roof or in the same hallways, and, even in the same rooms, because they would have multiple beds sometimes in rooms. They were all being housed together regardless of what their diagnosis was. And that can be very, very harmful to, patients, like other patients, to the staff members. It can be very detrimental for treatment processes. It can hinder your recovery, and it's just not very good. It's a big melting pot that shouldn't be mixed together. Now, another big problem that I uncovered was that at this point in time, patients were being sterilized, meaning they were being made to where they couldn't have children without their permission or consent. So they weren't fully aware of the procedure that was being done to them. They weren't aware that at the point in time, I think it was called a eugenics law. Georgia was one of the last states to sign a eugenics law, but we had signed it at this point, and that means that the patient can, attest or say, no, I don't want this procedure done. But none of the patients were ever informed about this, so they were just having the surgery done. If they did know about it, it was like, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. I'm not supposed to have children, even though that wasn't the truth. So that was very negligent on the staff's part. And the reason why this was implemented in the first place, or why they were doing sterilization at all, was because they believed that basically mentally ill people or mentally handicapped or whatever they were there for shouldn't be procreating. They shouldn't be having other generations with the same type illness. So that was kind of the basis behind that. By 1942, so we've been open for quite some time now, basically 100 years. We opened in 1842. It's now 1942. We have 15 medical staff members. And the patient population was nearing 10,000. Even if these 15 people were working around the clock, full time, every single day of their lives, that still would not be enough staff to handle 10,000 patients. Because this isn't 10,000, flus, You have patients who are potentially dangerous to themselves, potentially dangerous to other people. You just have so much going on. There's not enough manpower to handle this all. And at this point in time, nurses and attendants were required to decide who needed shock treatment. So, of course, not everybody will need shock treatment. Shock treatments, no matter what kind they are only beneficial to certain patients and certain, mental illnesses. So not everybody should have them or get them done. But they just started doing it on everybody. What they would call the Georgia Power cocktail was what they would call it, was when they would do the electroshock treatments or electroconvulsive therapy. They were both workers and patients at this point in time were unsure if they were using this as treatment or punishment. Like I said, only certain people need this for treatment. And other times, of course, they would threaten it for punishment. Like if you don't behave or if you don't quiet down or if you don't do this, you're going to be, shocked. But at this point in time, they were just doing it to do it because they had no other way to control them. Because after shock treatments, of course, most of the time, people are going to be out of it. They're hazy. They're not really fighting anymore. They have loss of memory, things like that. So it quieted the population down, so everybody just started getting it. By the 1960s, so 20 years after 1942, or they're at 10,000, 20 years later, Central State Hospital, which is now the name, was the largest mental institution in the entire world. Not Georgia, the entire world, okay? It held around 12 to 13,000 patients at its maximum capacity, which was way over its maximum capacity. That's just how many they had at the point in time. And it had also grown to around 200 buildings. Of course, with this many people, you're going to have a lot of mistreatment. And it was rumored at this point in time that children were being left in metal cages and that adults were being put in and left in straitjackets. So with a few workers and then a whole bunch of people, there's definitely time left unattended. There's times where they can't go back and do their rounds, or there's going to be a time where the rounds are going to be so far and few and in between. And so these people are just being left in these cages and left in these straitjackets. Straitjackets are normally meant to be used for whenever somebody is going to hurt themselves or harm another person, but they're not meant to stay in a straitjacket. That's a movie type thing. You know what I'm saying? That's not something that would happen in real life, but it was happening here at this point in time. And the treatments being used at this at this peak time included shock therapies, which there's two different kinds that they were, or two or three different kinds that they were using. We have electroconvulsive therapy. And when that was originally created, so it's not as scary or dangerous now if somebody still gets it done, but originally when it was created, it was extremely scary. It wasn't as regulated. They didn't know as much about it. Like I said, they were basically using it as treatment and punishment, and it's where they take two paddles and put it on each temple, and then they turn up the voltage. And what it does is it basically induces a seizure. Now you're like, why would you do that? Seizures for some medical illnesses or mental illnesses can decrease their side effects or decrease, even prevalence of that mental illness at all, either for short periods of time or for, forever. So that was really the basis behind that. But like I said, in the beginning, it was extremely dangerous. It wasn't as regulated. And then another shock therapy is insulin shock therapy. And I can't believe this one was ever used. I could never figure out what their reasoning behind this one was. By the way, somebody let me know. I just couldn't figure it out online. So if you do know the reason why why doctors use this or why it was being tested, if you could please let me know in the comments. Please do. But insulin shock therapy is when they would overdose their patient on insulin, which would put you into a coma. And they would do this over weeks at a time, basically, to induce these short comas. They also use ice baths for treatment. So I guess if you were misbehaving, they just pop you right in there and call it a done deal, make you really uncomfortable. Other practices, of course, included lobotomies, which, if you don't know what a lobotomy is basically when they go in and sever the nerves of the prefrontal cortex. And I don't think lobotomies are done anymore at all, but they were being done here quite a lot. In the absence of a physician, so obviously there's not that many doctors, we really don't have that many workers in general, but we don't have a lot of doctors at all. So in the absence of a physician, a nurse would perform a variety of treatments, whatever that may be, and at times even serious medical surgery. So we're having nurses do these shock therapies, whether it be insulin or the electroconvulsion one. We're having them throw patients in ice baths. We're having them hand out medication, which they're allowed to do stuff like that. But what really is scary is that they're able to do these surgeries unassisted without a physician there. And like, even though they obviously, you think they would like know what's going on, at this point in time, these nurses were working 60 to 70 hours a week. Do you know how tired these people are? I assume at this point in time, it's going to be mostly women. Do you know how tired these women are? Because when they're not performing these life-altering surgeries, or whenever they're not sitting there strapping somebody down, they are having to take care of thousands of patients at a time. That is going to wear your mental, that's just going to wear your brain down so much. And then you're having them have to do like physical labor. So let's say a patient decides that they want to, fight back, or if they want to make a run for it, if they get into a fight, there's just so much physical and manual labor going on. Plus, we still have 200 buildings. They're having to travel and go back and forth. We don't have golf carts to be just cruising around over here between building to building. I mean, these people are being pushed to the brink, and that's what's scary is think about how tired they are when they're trying to do these surgeries. I'm not saying these nurses weren't capable. They just had no supervision, and they were extremely tired. And then also, too, they were only doing this for a salary of $75 a month. Not me. Not fucking me, bitch. No. So, then there was a news article done. I think his last name was Nelson. He found out that as few as 48 doctors were responsible for around 13,000 patients. 48... 13,000. That's a huge, huge difference. And what makes it even worse is that not one psychiatrist was on staff. So we have a mental hospital with no psychiatrist anywhere. Nowhere to be found. No offense, but I want somebody who knows what they're doing, who have specifically studied psychiatry to diagnose me, to put me on medication, to, do all of these things. That's extremely scary. So at that point in time, the writer of this article won a Nobel Peace Prize, and then the hospital ended up firing basically all of that staff. Patients who died on the land were normally buried on the land as well. There is a cemetery that's on location, of course, and it has over 25,000 bodies. It's estimated between 25,000 and 30,000 bodies over there. And the reason they don't really know is because they started using iron markers, so they never got like gravestones or anything like that. But they had started putting out some iron markers, and then there were some groundskeepers who found it a hassle to try and mow around them, and so they started throwing thousands of these iron markers into the woods. So now there is only around 2,000 iron markers there, but there were some patient records, so they know that many more are buried there. And those 2,000 were put back in place by some volunteers to commemorate the dead, basically. The state of Georgia finally announced the closure of Central State Hospital in 2010. By the closure of it, there was basically an entire town. There had been a prison, there was a mortuary, there was somebody there building caskets, they had their own police department, fire department. They had a whole city basically going at this point. My boyfriend has actually snuck in there before, and he said it's so eerie. It's insane that, of course, everything's falling apart and it's old and decrepit, but he said there was weird, vibes that at certain points in time, they would just be like a cold rush or a cold wind, and you would get cold chills and things like that. There was a Bible in the prison whenever he went into the prison that was open, and it had blood spatters all over it. Now, whether somebody did that later on or not, that's still extremely creepy and just, ugh. And like online, you can read about people who have like driven around or tried sneaking in. So whether you even believe in the paranormal or not, that's still an extremely sad place. Very haunting, awful history. But I did want to give special thanks to a couple of websites where I found some articles and things like that. I have Atlas Obscura, of course, Wikipedia for some dates I'm going to open, Asylum Projects, and Albany Herald. All of those were really good sources for me to find, different events and actually piece it all together. So thank you to all of those websites. And if you would like, definitely do your own research too. There's a lot more to be found. But I hope you guys did enjoy this very different kind of story time video. If you could, please like this video, comment down below, and also subscribe to my channel. It would be greatly appreciated. See you guys next time.